Well, welcome. Did y'all have a good morning?
Yeah.
Yes.
All right. So this is going to make it better. We have a great treat for y'all. This guy for me is one of the reasons why I have his bio, but I'm going to talk about it from my heart because I love this guy. For me, coming into activism was kind of like an accident. I started off on YouTube, and it was basically like a little daily journal, just talking about stuff, and it kind of got popular, and people was coming to me with just questions, and because I was an older trans girl, they would come to me with questions, and I'm like, I kind of figured out everything that myself. And even though I was older, it just was like, I can tell you this, but that part I didn't figure it out. So in 2010, I went to a trans faith summit in Los Angeles, and I'm sitting out in like the lobby. It's kind of like the lobby area where all the vendors are, and I'm just standing and I'm talking to people. I've never been to like a conference at the time. I had never been to a conference. This was kind of my first one. And Lewis, who at the time I didn't know was a trans guy, because I hadn't been around trans guys that often. So, I was sitting there talking about, who is this old man? And he just had such a humble spirit that I was just kind of drawn to him. So the whole time, if I was in an uncomfortable space at the conference, I would look for Louis. Let me find him. Because he made me comfortable. And that whole weekend, he just gave me so much. Every time he speaks, it was something that was like, ding, Oprah aha moments. So he's really, really special to me. And I want to thank you for inspiring me to go here and be who I am today in this studio. All right. Reverend Lewis Mitchell came from a long line of people who believe that community building and community service are important spiritual values. Using a broad range of resources, theory, and study, he brings a fresh, on-the-ground, open-hearted, holistic strategy to the work of individual and community healing. Using his own life experiences and varied work, volunteer work, social justice, and ministry experience, Lewis seeks to share a vision of intersectional thinking and bringing a commitment to inclusion and mutuality to each setting that he is invited to be a part of. Lewis serves as the Minister of Family and Congregational Life at the South Congregational Church in Springfield, Massachusetts, and is the Community Engagement Coordinator for Trans Faith. He's also a member of the National Black Justice Coalition Leadership Advisory Council, a founding member of the Fellowship of Affirming Ministries, Trans Faiths, and recently stepped down as the East Coast Regional Minister, a member of the Religious Leaders Roundtable, and founding member of the Transgender Religious Leader Roundtable. Lewis was named as one of the 10 leading Black religious leaders in advancing LGBTQ justice on the Believe Out Loud, honored in 2014. Body Image for Justice Community Wellness Champion. He received the Pioneer Award in 2014 at the Trans Faith and Action Network Conference. That was named, and he was also named on the Trans 100 list. Lewis was awarded in 2011 the Haystack Award for the at the Massachusetts Conference of United Church of Christ for his work in social justice and social ministry. He was featured as an award-winning documentary, Still Black, a portrait of a Black trans man. I love that movie. He returned to Massachusetts in 2013 after supporting the opening of the Morris Home in Philadelphia, the first substance abuse recovery program designed specifically for transgender and gender nonconforming people, as their manager of support services. He lives in Springfield, Massachusetts, and is blessed to be surrounded by a wonderful family, traditional and chosen. He and his wife, Chrissia, and his daughter, Paula, and that he welcomed into their life. Life in 2012. I want to present to you our speaker for this evening.
Greetings, everyone.
Greetings.
The good news for you is that I have a big mouth, and so amplification is not necessary for me. However, I do want to be thoughtful. If you can't hear me, please let me know. I will try to speak up.
I'll move closer.
If you can hear me, you don't want to, well, you're just shit out of luck. I will pray for you later. First and foremost, I want to thank my friend and sister Diamond for those really important words. You know, often when we show up and do this work, we don't always know the impact we have on other people. And so it is a blessing and a gift to hear that in my own frantic energy, I was able to provide calming influence for someone else. I also want to thank Neo and the entire team that put this on. If you've never put on a conference, or you've never put on an event, you have no idea. The sleepless nights, the petty arguments, the 60 people that say they're going to do something, and the handful that actually show up to do something. You have no idea the personal expense and the complete terror that you have in the wee hours at the beginning of the event that everything possible is going to go wrong. I want to take a moment to really applaud every hand and heart that has played a part in this conference, because no one does it alone. Neo is the face of the conference, but there have been a number of people that have contributed and prayed for him and toted us back and forth all weekend and put up with our whining and our needs for things. And so I want to give you the first round of applause. I also want to acknowledge my joy at being in presence and in residence at the making of history last night. No matter what happens from this point forward, those of you who were contestants and competitors, you will always be the first. There'll never be another group of the first. And that's something that no one can ever take away from you, and something that no one can ever take away from those of us that were fortunate enough to witness it. I do want to say some things about that, because in my time in transition, the notion that trans men could be in a community with one another, the notion that we could actually appreciate our embodiments, is really an amazing thing. An amazing thing. You know, in the years preceding my transition, it was encouraged that you move away from home, you don't tell anybody your backstory, you lose your entire life, and you don't tell anybody ever that you are a man of trans experience. So what that did was it allowed people some comfort, but it also stood in the way of ever building community. You can't build community if nobody knows who you are. What we have done in recent history, and I'm going to say transmasculine specifically, because in the media there have been some trans women, Christine Jorgensen and others, who there was at least a notion that someday I could be this. In terms of transmasculinity, there was nothing in the media ever. And so when I was envisioning myself as a little boy, while my mom and dad were dressing me as a little girl, there was no, it was impossible. And I was talking a little bit earlier, and you know, when I was 3 or 4 years old, all I really wanted to be was a husband and a father. And when I was 3 or 4, it was impossible. I'm living the impossible right now. And so I want to say to you that if there's something in your life that you dream of that's impossible, take heart. The impossible may be improbable, but it's still doable. And I'm a testament to that. So let me kind of get into this so I don't keep you for too terribly long. I want to talk about spirituality. There's a lot. Neo said last night that I was someone that people went to for spiritual comfort, and other people have called me kind of the community online pastor after a fashion. But what I mean by spirit is really a sense of connectedness. I have a particular religious menu choice that I've made, and I don't require that anyone makes that same menu choice. More important to me than your doctrine or your faith, if you will, is that you seek a connectedness. with one another, and with those who are not able to be in this room. And so I want to talk a little bit about some of our growth areas, and then I want to challenge you, because I like to give homework. It's one of the things that I like to do. So let's start with talking about privilege. Often when we come together, we talk about the ways in which we're oppressed. We talk about the circumstances that have kept us down, the various oppressions that we face. I want to flip that and talk about the ways that we're privileged. If we are here in this room, we are privileged. There is no one providing sign interpretation, so it is relatively safe for me to assume that all of us are hearing people, or at least to a greater or lesser degree able to participate on that level. We need to talk about our ability privilege. Those of us that are U.S. born need to talk about our nationalist privilege. Those of us that are not currently hampered by disabilities need to talk about ableism and the privilege that we have in that regard. For those of us that have decided in our lives that manhood is who we are, we also need to talk about male privilege. Some of us who have intersecting oppressions may identify that as situational privilege. For example, if I am out and I'm out with a group of women, typically whoever is in charge will look to me for an answer, even though I may not be the person who they should be asking. That's male privilege. That is the invisibilizing of the women that I'm with. Or in some cases, the more feminine people that I'm with, whether or not they identify as women. In the United States, I am also a black man. So I have the privilege of being a man and the burden of being a suspect. That's why I call it situational privilege. I also want to talk about another term that I don't know that I've coined it, because somebody else may have used it, but I've not heard it anywhere, which is residual privilege, which I often find in older white trans women of privilege, of money, that they are no longer privileged as the white men that they were perceived as. But there is a notion of how they should be treated that is based on residual privilege. And so when we say to people, you're behaving privileged, it's important to understand there's a language in which they can hear you and a language in which they cannot. When you talk about residual privilege, they might be able to get, oh, yeah, I'm feeling this entitlement because I just spent 50 years living in it unconsciously. But now, as a trans woman often, they are mortified at the notion that sexism exists. They're like, oh my God, did you know this was going on? Yeah, we've been working on that, jump on the board. But part of that desire to come into a community in which you've just realized an oppression and move yourself into leadership comes from residual privilege. I know you've just realized that sexism exists, sweetie, but get in line. We got this. We've been working on it. Privilege is useless to discuss unless you talk about the proper use of privilege. All of us have privilege. And one of the things I've noticed over the years in our community is we focus on the oppression. We don't want to focus on the privilege, because if we focus on the privilege, we have an obligation to do something with it. As someone who is fortunate enough to have binary privilege, the proper use of my privilege is to always advocate for non-binary identities to be voiced in the room. That is the proper use of my privilege. The proper use of my privilege as a man is to ensure that there is always space. Not just space to join in, but space to be in leadership for women and for feminine identities. That is the proper use of my male privilege. The proper use of my privilege as a United States citizen is to advocate for people who are not. To bring up things like autism and encouraging people to have signers and things at events that are supposed to be open to the community. To encourage, as I will in the very near future, that we have a whole category in the next few years for people with disabilities to compete. Because I looked at all those poses, and some of the poses I couldn't do on my best. That whole thing with you down like this, that thing. Daddy's knees and ankles would not do that. I get down. I can drop it like it's hot, but it's going to take intervention to get it back up again. So it's one of the ways in which we can open the doors to the things that we love and enjoy to community members that are so frequently left out. They are in the margins of the margins of the margins of the margins of our community. Many of us who are of color have been in the margins of the margins of the margins of the trans community for as long as there's been such a thing as a trans community. I'm now going to move into another phase of this that I want you to consider. One of the other things that I note often is, I'm attempting to be diplomatic, which is not always my strong point. One of the things that happened to me last night that really, it both tickled me and challenged me was a way in which I was approached by someone with a level of kind of cultural familiarity that felt a little bit inappropriate. And I'm going to give you the example. It was one of those, "Hey, bro." I'm like, dude, fall back on that a second. You don't know me like that. But it was one of those things that I felt compelled to mention that I want us to pay attention to as we build community, which is we need to learn the difference between appreciation and appropriation. It's really, really important to those of us that are culturally sensitive to having things stolen from us. History, fashion, style, ways of speaking, all of those things are very tender places. When you're wanting to do intersectional and community work, you have to be very thoughtful about the difference between appreciation and appropriation. The other thing that I noticed last night, because I was backstage with the competitors while they were all hungry and cranky and thirsty and frustrated by some of the organizational quirks that happen in any event, is that there was a competitive edge that I understood, and I also found it a little bit challenging. And one of the things that I hope for us as a community is that we will be able to marry the necessary competitiveness of something like the competition last night with also a greater sense of community that encapsulates all of that. When you're bowling or bodybuilding or playing poker or any of those things where there's going to be winners and people who aren't winners, a level of competitiveness is important. I learned this in the ballroom scene, and I'm not a ballroom aficionado because A, they start too late, it's past my bedtime. B, some of the misogynist language just pisses me off. But in that, there's all this shade and cattiness and stuff that's a part of the culture, right? I get that, and I also am concerned